It used to be a situation where not ends of civilizations, ends of communities, ends of towns, cities, clans, those kind of things used to happen where it was like over a certain time there was a certain storyline, certain arcs. Societies and cultures would follow certain arcs. The Roman Empire was the empire, and then it ended up being nothing at all.
Yeah.
If you have the American, what the American is today, I don't think United States of America, like some of the things that I don't like about sci-fi is like 200 years or like 1,000 years in the future, and they're still like, oh, United States of America. I'm like, no, United States of America is not going to exist as like a North American country in 1,000 years in the future. Like it will end, but it's not going to end in it. I don't think things will end in that destructive
Yeah.
sense where it's like, okay, everything is completely gone. You people go back in history and be like, oh, people lived here in the past. Like we're going to rediscover certain things that these people had, because that's kind of how it happens with previous ways. When somebody died, when something ended, it would be catastrophic, complete end, possibly wiped out of the earth. Now I think it's more like it will morph into change something else, and you look at different ideologies and different things that have been changing. And I think he was seeing certain markers that in the past, historically, did presage an actual complete end of that culture. It was heading towards, as it had. There was the World War One and Two was a culmination of just a long warring period where it's just these groups of people would have beef with these groups of people. They'd intermarry for a while, then somebody would do this and buy that land there, and then somebody will come in, and this other person from the outside would come in and do this, and then all of a sudden, like something would spark. There'd be a war of like 7 year war.
Yeah.
It's like we were fighting, like, and then during that 7 year war, there was multiple clans that were not at the top, but they would have their own cultures and languages and like ideology that were completely wiped out, or they would just completely leave. Like this place is completely abandoned, and that's the kind of ideology that I think that's the kind of history, that's the kind of thing that was in our nature to think like loss was death. And think about the things people today consider loss. That most of the people listen to this, you have people around you who bemoan certain losses when it's just like
Yeah.
it's something so minor when it actually comes to the reality of the things. Like, and you're just like, are you really crying over that? Whereas, so that's I think something that with some of these terms, with some of these words, I'd be very curious to think what other people would actually think and associate when they hear some of these terms, and some of the things that I think Marcuse was accurately seeing. I think were based off of an expectation of a different sort of calculation that is not necessarily being like if you have when people talk about wars happening again, like how do you actually see that happen? Like
Yeah.
where do you actually see the ability to maintain and run a world war kind of situation where it's like a massive part of humanity is engaged in war for an extended period of time over in like how do you think the resources are going to happen? How is there going to be support? Like I just don't see that happening, and maybe I'm the one who's entirely wrong, and I think that's a positive thing. Now I would wonder, would Marcuse say it's that way now because his ideas have actually won out, or is it despite his ideas not being adopted and him saying if we actually adopted some of his ideas, it would be even more peaceful and more we'd have more human flourishing, we'd have more lack of misery and things like that. Because I think he would definitely be aware of how much more miserable history was than he actually knew at that time, I think. Yeah.
Well, also to add on to your fall of Rome, it's important to emphasize with something like that, and it may be the same with this country too. It wasn't like a fell sudden swoop, like, okay, you had Rome and then it fell. It was the empire was gradually ceding territory. It couldn't afford to defend it. Of course, before that, there was a split between East and West. Different groups were gradually seizing lands on the edge. I know Rome was sacked a few times, and it was 476 when Rome fell that Odoacer took over Rome, declared himself king, and then that's officially the end. And they say the Senate actually continued to meet for some time after that, but they're not clear to when they stopped, because at that point the Senate had no power. They were more figureheads anyway. The emperor was deposed, and then what was Rome gradually fractured, and those became fiefdoms. The lords that were strong enough to survive, of course, conquered other people. Those eventually became countries, on and on. I know also the Byzantines recaptured Rome but lost it. So it would be a similar thing with America. Like, I know when you were with Adam Patrick on his show, you guys talked about America breaking up into sections. It could be something like that, where it breaks up into sections. Some do well, one falls apart, one recaptures an old territory. Who knows? It's not going to be, okay, you have a world power, then it just collapses all at once. It's a series of phases. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is what I ask people. Do you think the world's going more towards what China is trying to do, trying to get that hegemonic type of control, one culture, one society, get everyone under one thing with the huge, massive People's Party, like the communist, the CCP, the Chinese
Chinese
Communist
Communist
Party.
Party. Yeah.
Yeah, where they're just becoming that hegemon, becoming that monoculture type of thing. There's no way you're going to be able to do that and establish that. Like, there's no way China, as China is, can come to Kenya and then dominate Kenyans. What they can do is right now they can have the few people who are in control of certain things and have access to certain things and resources get into contracts and sell out Kenyans and things. But they're not going to be able to bring Han Chinese culture and have the entire nation of Kenya just adopt that. It's like, no, this is not going to happen. What's probably going to happen is more going towards like what's happening in the United States of America. You're talking about the senators being figureheads.
Yeah.
I mean, the senators are pretty much figureheads. Where it's just like,
Yeah.
oh, you're going to vote one way anyway. It's like 50-50. We know it's
Yeah.
50-50. We know like 49 of the Democrats are going to vote this way, 49 of the Republicans are going to vote that way. There might be one or two people who would change things. And we know that's going to happen. It doesn't matter if it's this person, if it's Joe Sixpack from Alabama, or Mike. Sorry, if it's Joe Sixpack, Republican from Alabama, or Mike Winecooler, Republican from Alabama,
Huh.
if they're in the Senate, they're going to vote the same way regardless. Like we're not. It's not like, oh, there's going to be a really big difference between these two people. It's like, no, because they kind of are already figureheads. You already have the situation where people like sanctuary cities. This things would happen. People are like making declarations. Oh, we're going to do this. We're going to do that. Trump came in and put a lot of his declarations, and Biden came in and said, we're not going to do any of those anymore. Then when Biden leaves, the next person is going to say, we're not going to do any of those anymore. And you're really having states where it's like, we're not going to listen to you anymore. So that's probably what's going to happen more in the world. The global culture is going to be like that. It's going to be more, I think, more cities and more tight, smaller areas where people come together and have certain agreements and like, oh, we like these laws, we like these rules, we're going to pick and choose in this place, and we're going to have certain relations with this other place somewhere else. You wouldn't even have that, where the Chinese government is already going to like smaller level people to make little agreements between little townships and little areas where you'll find some small town in Nebraska gets somehow over 50% of its revenue from some relationship it has with the Chinese Communist Party. Because instead of them having the factory in Nebraska, they have some kind of things where they make a component and then they ship it there. And then that component is finished in China and then shipped to the rest of the world. And that's how the relationship works. Now, does the Chinese Communist Party somehow have an incentive, instead of having that relationship, to send 1 million of its People's Liberation Army members to occupy Nebraska so they can have that? What's the sense in that? It's not going to happen that kind of way. That's not the direction the world is going into. Trade and things like that have provided so many more profitable and safer and easier ways to get many more benefits than could come from destruction and warfare and things like that. That to me is a positive thing.
Well, as you and Adam discussed too, as far as globalism as a libertarian thing, that's very good. I mean, freedom of movement, freedom of trade, all this. But we talked about different religions and philosophies earlier. I mean, Jews 5,000 years later, there's still multiple tribes and multiple sects within Judaism. Christianity split into hundreds of churches that can't agree on the same thing. It's like you can't impose one value system on the entire world and just expect everyone to say, this is great, let's all believe this. That'll never happen. I mean, it can't happen within individual religions, within individual countries. How are you going to do that on a world scale? There's no way. Like human nature does not allow that.
And the amount of control on information they had back then was infinitely more than they have now. Like you just can't. You're not going to be able to keep those things. Like it's individualism will win through. Thank you for listening. This has been a clip from an actual longer recording that I'll try to leave a link to on the screen or somewhere around here where you're listening to this.
Presents. 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 Presents.
Peasants.
Okay. Okay.